Recording now.
Hello, this is Eric Johnson, Coach EJ, the brand.
And this is Coach Aaron Thigpen, the source.
Welcome to our podcast today, Aaron. This is one of our favorite topics that comes up and something that is near and dear to our heart because we've done both.
Yeah. Group training versus private training. The debate continues. I think there's a place for both. I'll let you start off on this. You can fire the first shot.
I do because I think I like this topic because there is a place for both. And I think for athletes that are trying to get instruction or training and they haven't had very much, a group setting is great. It establishes a foundation and a base so they can go forward and leads to private instruction. Okay, so I always say this, I have these courses or here's a opportunity for you to get in some really good foundation core type stuff. Come here first and do this. Okay, that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is you have this athlete that is really exceptional and you see it, me as an instructor, I see that, and maybe they need to be in an environment where it's more private because I'm gonna technically work on things that they have established already to polish it up. That's when you need private instruction in that situation, to polish up something or add some more to the foundation. I think you have to use both sometimes with athletes where they're in a group instruction environment and you pull them out of that and say, I want to refine this a little bit more. You may be a little bit further along in the class, so let me help you with this one little thing, or let me refine that so when you go back into that setting, it's more polished.
Right. No, I agree. It couldn't be situational based on the athlete. Mm-hmm. And there's pros and cons of both. For classes, I think they're a great way to introduce an athlete just to some concepts and even just to kind of get a what I call a cursory evaluation on an athlete, where you kind of see them in a general setting, doing some things with the group, from a coach's standpoint, and you can kind of eyeball some things without really worrying about, the pressure of testing and having all eyes on them and that sort of thing. The other thing with the group setting I like is especially for younger athletes, it can help to indoctrinate them into how to participate in a group training environment and the structure and discipline that's required and, and the camaraderie and teamwork that might happen out of something like that. And it also is it's kind of a low barrier of entry into something where there's maybe less fear because you're in a group, small group setting. So there's less apprehension. I see that sometimes with young ladies. And you can also, put them with a group that maybe is a little closer to their ability level. So I think those sorts of things are positives when you're looking at a class structure. And I think those are things that actually should be considered when you're putting a kid in a class structure. It's not like you want to put, this 9-year-old kid into a group of, 14-year-olds.
Right.
Especially if they're training. Yeah. So I think those are some considerations when looking at group or class training. But I think it's a good way to start an athlete. For the private training, it's a little bit more nuanced. Usually what I tell my clients is if you want private instruction, there usually needs to be certain things in place. It either needs to be we're working on a specialty aspect where we're troubleshooting, an aspect, and it needs a lot more attention and refinement, or there's some kind of learning disconnect that requires less external, distractions for an athlete. So that, again, I think training is about communication. So
Absolutely.
I'm really big on what environment you have or have put together so that the communication is good and the flow of the information from the instructor to the athlete is unobstructed. Mm-hmm. So those are generally the criteria that I use. And I get parents who want, well, I just think they need to be by themselves. And, I listen to that, but I also listen to what the athlete needs. And you can't always train an athlete in a bubble. Right. And you got to be able to interact with those around them. And my thing about the group training is it's a great way for an athlete to learn through osmosis. Because if there's a group of 5 or 6 and I make a correction on this athlete's arm technique,
right.
Well, it's not just information that flows to him. It now flows to the group. And if you've got an athlete whose ears are open and is paying attention, is engaged, that same message may resonate with them. And now they also get to see a visual representation of that correction. So it's not just the verbal correction that happens between an athlete and the coach. Now they actually see a visual representation. And we know athletes learn in a lot of different ways. They learn visually, they learn, verbally, they learn kinesthetically. So that group environment or class allows for a pretty wide range of ways for that information to flow.
Right. What a great learning environment you just mentioned right there. You have ways for us as instructors to see the progression of an athlete. We see the ability of an athlete to communicate with others and work with others in a team setting. You see something that I think is important is you see that competitive spirit come out in them, whether they are an exceptional athlete or not. The kids want to compete at some level, whatever that level is for them. And if one athlete sees another athlete doing better or I want to compete, you're teaching an athlete how to be competitive. And that's something that's not taught in a private setting sometimes.
Right.
Or maybe, parents want private instruction and they forget about that competitive spirit needs to be there for athletes to compete, whether it's an individual sport or a team sport. And I think that's so important. In classes, group instruction allows that to come out. And, like you said, in private instruction, the other side of it, that's specialization. I always call it specialization training, because you're really working on an aspect of that player's development and going forward, whether it's something they need to learn, to polish, or to excel in. And, there is room for both of them, and both should be considered in the right frame or the right time frame for each athlete. Each athlete's different. Private instruction, group instruction is different for all athletes. And I think we as instructors understand that. And we like parents and players to understand that also, because that gives them the ability to understand where they can be evaluated. And I think that's important too. And you said this earlier, in group instruction, you get a good idea of where athletes stand and where their progress is. And you can pass on the information to the parent that sees that. I think that's important too,
Yeah. And, again, when you're talking about that group or that class instruction, you do want to be selective. Now, sometimes I get the whole, well, who's going to be in this class, because the parent, assumes that their athlete is more advanced. Right, and, we have a way of operating when we do classes together. Yes. And I think parents need to understand it's not about always about the age or the development, and especially when you're talking about skills-based classes, um, because you and I both know you can have a 9-year-old who's developed a high level of skill, and then you can have a 14-year-old who hasn't,
Right.
and doesn't mean they should be, in just because the 14-year-old is older doesn't necessarily mean he shouldn't be with a
They're not
younger athlete who
exactly.
happens to be more skilled.
Mhm.
And so even within a group training or a class setting, I want parents to always understand about what is the focus of the class and what's being taught. Because if it's more of a skill-based class,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter who's sitting next to you.
Right.
It doesn't matter who's working out next to your kid, because it's about the curriculum and the information that's being imparted and your athlete learning that. It's not about whether he's competing against,
Right.
that 9-year-old. Now, yes, if there's more physically based classes, where it's weightlifting and running and, all of those
Right.
sorts of things, yeah, then that's a concern. But if it's a skills based class,
Mhm.
remember, it's about getting the information and learning the skill. It's not about who's sitting next to me. I mean, it's like going in a martial arts class. You know, I first went in, I'm a white belt and I'm 40 years old,
Right.
and there's a 13-year-old who,
Oh.
who's a black
Right.
belt. So I'm
Right.
going to
Right.
say, well, hey, I'm not supposed to be in there just because I'm older and I'm bigger, hey, this kid could probably kick my ass. So,
I love it. Right? I get it.
so it's, again, you got to kind of be careful when you guys are making these considerations,
Yeah.
and look at the information that's on the flyer that's put out there and say, hey, what's appropriate. And if you don't know, ask the coaches, how's this class going to be conducted. Again, with us, even when we have a multi-tiered class, we always will group athletes by ability.
Right.
So even though an age range might be from 9 to 14, we
Right.
always will group athletes by ability.
It-
So,
And also by doing that, Aaron, it makes the athlete feel comfortable in that setting. And that's something, that kids are uncomfortable in training. If they've never had training before, they want to be around kids that are very similar in talent or ability, because it makes them feel comfortable and they're in a good place. In this day and age, that's how athletes are, is they need to be comfortable when they're training in terms of the athletes around them, and their interest level goes up. And we want their interest level to go up. We want them to be engaged in the process of training. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, is that's one thing that you and I have done for years, is the ability to look at these guys when we're doing a functional fitness test that you do. And we do it both from a sports performance side and from a technical baseball side, and mix it together. So that's always good. And I agree with what you say, to the parents, that, hey, realize that when you're having your kids in these group instruction type classes, or even in private training also.
yeah. Well, again, you touched on about the athlete being comfortable. And I think that's also an important aspect of the private training. The private training, I
Mm-hmm.
think, um, does foster an environment where the athlete is probably a little more comfortable, but it should just be a springboard into other,
Right.
build other classes also. So an athlete can kind of transition back and forth to each one. And I also think, one of the values of private coaching is that if you're trying to establish that coach athlete connection, and
Right.
building some of the confidence that needs to happen between an athlete and a coach,
Right.
and those sorts of things, I think is important with private coaching. But it shouldn't be the sole reason why you look for private coaching. I think, again, the other things that we mentioned before about, hey, what's the real purpose and outcome of the private coaching in terms of the specialty, aspect to it, in terms of maybe a special event preparation,
Mhm.
in terms of going back and doing maybe some remedial work that an athlete needs. All of those are good reasons for private coaching. So I guess, when the conversation's all said and done,
Right.
they're both good. But they each have their place, and they each have their time, and one doesn't necessarily have to replace the other. Combination of the two is optimal for any athlete, but understanding what you're trying to get out of the experience, whether it's class or private, is probably what you should focus on, and then move accordingly.
I like that. I like the way you put a bow on it, because the more we understand and can communicate to all the people that are out there listening to us, it's better for you to understand what training's about in terms of a private setting and a class setting. Okay. Again, this is Coach EJ, Coach Eric Johnson, the brand.
And Coach Aaron Thigpen, the source. Check us out on all social media, Facebook. God, I can't even remember them.
Instagram,
Twitter, Instagram,
Facebook
and,
Live, everything.
All that stuff. Give us your feedback. You could welcome to send us a text with some of your ideals about some of the topics you'd like to hear about. Again, we're here to give you the benefit of our experience and expertise over the 25 plus years we've both been doing this as coaches, and 40 plus years as athletes. So use us. We're a resource.
All right. Until next time, we'll check you out later. Have a great day.
See ya.